Hemshech Chaim Beis, Volume 1, the end of chapter 164. Briefly explaining the interface of Ak, Adam Kadmon, with prefacing the question, since Adam Kadmon, the world of Adam Kadmon, the primordial man is considered the level of the process of how it all begins, creation, existence, and since it is called Adam de Bria, the man of Bria, meaning a man of structure of a created world. As we discussed, all these worlds are not physical worlds. They're basically spiritual stages of development that are constantly happening. So Ak would be like the seed. The next level would be the seed beginning to blossom. The next levels, the next Atzilus Bri Yitzira would be the seed growing into a tree. So in the physical world, once a seed becomes a tree, it's no longer a seed. In the spiritual world, these worlds are continuously going through the same process, and we constantly have access to every stage of development. So even though we see the final product in this world of Asiya, but this final product has within it layers and layers of the forces, of the evolutionary forces that have shaped it, and they're there right now as well. So understanding these layers is understanding how we climb the ladder from the more tangible or the physical all the way to the more sublime, into the divine. So each of these levels serves as interfaces to connect to a deeper divine dimension, a deeper energy level. So Ak is an interface because since Ein Sof, Elokus, as he says, Eira Ein Sof, the words were, Ashalei Be'erech, is infinitely distant. Ein Sof, Ein Be'erech Adam is infinitely distant from the world, so you need an interface. And that's Ak. But then the question is, where's the interface? Ak is itself a creation. So when you talk about Eir, there you're talking about Eir is a part of divine expression. So Eir, the Eir HaGvul, like he says, the Eir of Gvul, the Eir of Atzilus, is a divine expression of Gvul, and that's the interface between Eir Ein Sof and existence, and the Gvul of existence. But now we're talking about something that's already Gvul. We're talking about creation. We're talking about Ak. So where's there what role does it play? How's the interface? So he explained that there's two aspects in the jump, so-called, from the jump of Ein Hareich, meaning from a place that's infinitely distant, that Tzimtzum resolves. The Tzimtzum teaches us about this Ein Hareich. Why? Because it means the divine is so distant and apart and removed that everything is equal to it. Like he said, even the highest levels to the lowest levels, even Keser. Not like the Ramak that says Keser has some type of similarity because he doesn't have a Tzimtzum. So for him, everything works in gradations. Arizal, on the other hand, the Tzimtzum deals with this element of this radical leap. Then there's another aspect that you need Gilui. That in order to create, you also need an application. You need to apply yourself. He says, like the Keich HaPoel has to touch, or so-called, what is he called, the exact words, that has to come. Every pu'ula, the way God created existence, doesn't happen from a distance, doesn't happen from a detached way, it has to apply yourself. Like I said, God applies himself. We take a stone and we throw it. You touch the stone and you throw it. The same thing, the Eibishter, there's a level of Elokus that comes in the form of kiruv and closeness. That's the kav, that's the gilui. And that gilui, if it was just remained in its own state, it would also not be able to be absorbed by the lower levels of existence, and thus comes Ak. Ak is in that, once you already took the leap of the quantum leap of the Tzimtzum, in Gilui now Ak is an interface, the interface of, like he calls it, Klal to Prat. That first everything is in a general form, and then it comes in a more specific form. And Ak is the general form. It's like, think of it like the nucleus, like the seed. And then it will be break down as it goes through levels of diminishing as it goes further down. That's what he says. Bereshis nami maimerhu. Bereshis balakim. God created heaven and earth. Mefarshim say, Rashi says, it encompassed everything. Bereshis nami maimerhu. But then, basar ma'amoris nivrei elam. Even though he could have created all in that one thing, because he wants to have details. He wants it to come down into specifics. We have a structured existence that is made up of a whole infrastructure of details. And that is the prat. But it begins with the klal. So Bereshis bara Elokim is already after the tzimtzum. The tzimtzum handles, as I said, is the bridge that allows, that addresses the ein harech issue, the infinite distant issue, which Ak is also infinitely distant from before. So Ak can't serve as a mamutza there. Ak can't serve as an interface when it comes to something that's infinitely distant, because Ak is equal to the rest of existence. According to the Ramak, you could argue that Ak, or Keser if you wish, is closer to Ein Sof. Even though he said that Keser is closer, is as distant as that the distance between Keser and Ein Sof is far more distant than the distance between Keser and existence, but still, like he said, there's still a commonality. Keser is still fart at the end of the day closer. So there, it's Hayishtavas. But then you're dealing with an issue of that we can't really say in truth that there's a real commonality between Keser and the highest levels. Just like you can't say there's a commonality between Ak and the higher levels. So according to the Ramak, all you're dealing with is a more or less relative commonality. The Arizal, on the other hand, with the Chiddush of the Tzimtzum, deals and says, no, there's a levels in Ein Sof that are completely, everything is equal. And there's nothing common at all between Keser and Ak and all the levels to Ein Sof. And they're mamash equal. Not that it's more distant and this is closer and this is more distant. There's nothing in common. So Ak has nothing in common with Ein Sof. And then Ak serves as the mamutza, not a mamutza between Ein Sof and lower, a mamutza essentially between the klal and the prat. That once you're ready to deal with a radical jump, now you're dealing with stages that Ak deals with that. So basically the tzimtzum is in a state of helam and creates the key, like you said, din. And that's the more of a removed state. And Ak is part of his gilui. Im kein inyan im tsois Ak einzam mit zade eren so shebkhines ein harech. Kimadra mit zade madreges de eren so shebkhines kiruv. So Ak is dealing already with eren so that's in a state of kiruv and an application. In other words, Ak is similar to what the Ramak is saying. However, the Ramak is speaking that it's a similarity to Ein Sof. So here too there's a similarity, but it's a similarity that is connected to how the divine manifests in existence. And Ein Harech is handled through the tzimtzum. And finally, there's one more point that he made in that parentheses, that according to the Arizal, you also have the ability to have a piece of atzmus, so to speak. You have the Tachteina Shebemaitzel in Atik, which is also a chiddush of the Arizal. Even though it doesn't say it specifically, it sounds like it's interdependent. Because the Arizal speaks about the Ein Harech, that means that we have something in it. Existence can relate to this thing that is completely beyond. Relate not because there's a commonality, but because God wants us to have that relationship. So the Atik gives us a sense of that. Radla exists, that has in it, implanted in it, Elokus, but not because it has on its own any commonality. It's because God put, from God's perspective, from the divine perspective, He put something into existence, meaning into Keser, that is something from beyond. So the end of the day is that which is created does not have any commonality with the divine, so it is total bittul. So we see from this that because of the Seva of Kalam, the transcendent energy, the infinite energy, is complete bittul of existence. Not like the Ramak, you can't say complete bittul because there is ultimately little commonality between Keser and which is higher. Now, because he understands everything as in cause and effect, whereas in the Arizal, there is no commonality. So you have no commonality, and therefore we have that alone as a form of atik that comes into existence. Now, atik, as I explained, is higher than ak. So atik is a divine expression, as opposed to, like you said in the last line there, you said, anything that's created from Ein Sof, that cannot have ishtabus. So creation is a creation. And yet, we're able to relate to the divine itself. So therefore, you could say, one second, so then isn't the relationship one of total interface? The answer is yes, but this now we have dealt with the interface aspect of dealing in interface, that there's something that's completely beyond us, and that too is going to ultimately be able to have a relationship with us. But precisely because we recognize that it's infinitely distant from us. According to the Ramak, the relationship is because it has a relationship. There's some type of commonality. Here it's the opposite. There's no commonality. On the other hand, there is also an aspect that relates to existence, and that is Ak, and that's the Kav, that's the Gilui. So at the end of the day, we have basically now three things. We have Ir HaBli, we have Ir HaGvul, we have the Tzimtzum. The Ir HaBli is infinitely distant from everything. The Ir HaBli also has a second track, Ir HaGvul. So now we explain how Gvul also comes, that's Eris. That's from the level of energy. That energy also reveals to us that the Gvul. The Tzimtzum accounts for the infinite distance. And then the Kav, after the Tzimtzum, that already again begins to bring down, it's actually four things. The Ir HaGvul is the mamutza between the Ir HaBli and the finite structure of existence. The Tzimtzum, so to speak, not mamutza, but the Tzimtzum accounts for infinite distance. It teaches us that. From that we understand and can picture the infinite distance. And the Kav, after the Tzimtzum, or more specific, or more generally, Ak, that deals with the klal and prat. That once you have the gilui, afterwards, after the jump of the tzimtzum, now it starts going downwards from the general to the detail, from the seed to the details. The one thing that bothers me is, one second. So on the Kav, now the truth is, the Kav, as he says in the parentheses, also has in it from Atik.
Kav is the things.
No. The Kav, he says, also has from Atik. Okay, that's interesting. So the Kav also has in it implanted an aspect of the Bligvul. That makes sense. So basically what we have is as follows. The Ir HaBli, so I'm going to just sum it up. The Ir HaBligvul is divine consciousness in its full glory. Then there's the Ir HaGvul, which is God has also the power. The Ir HaGvul has in it that Shir Atzmi, that the God envisioned in the infinite possibilities, one possibility. So therefore the 10 spheres that we're going to relate to after the Tzimtzum have some relationship with how God envisioned the structure of existence. Okay. As we learn that those 10 spheres, the hidden spheres, have in it, they're min kanaf, they're from the same personality, the same material, substance as the Ir HaBli, as the infinite light, and they also have an impression from the Ir HaBli. Okay. Now comes the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum deals with that we're infinitely distant. So as much as God envisioned Gvul, that doesn't make him closer to us. That just means he envisioned a structured existence. From his perspective, that's just another divine element. So it's true. Without that, the only reason that you have that is because he wants a world. But it's not he wants a world because the world he needs it, or because the world is closer to him. It's because that's what the divine wants. So it's a divine dimension, it's a divine expression. So just like he has a divine expression of the Blikvul, there's a divine expression of Gvul, as we spoke. The Tzimtzum deals with the infinite distance that existence has. Because existence is not Ir HaGvul. Existence is already an existence like ours, that's finite, that's limited, that sees a certain only perspective. That's a yesh, has an ego, has a sense of self, and so on. Independent sense of self. How do you account for that? That's the tzimtzum. So the tzimtzum allows for that to be. Now, but the tzimtzum, that takes care of that. But then comes kav. The kav comes after the tzimtzum. And the kav brings back gili. And the kav is rooted in the er hagvul before the tzimtzum, as we said. The kav, which is going to bring the 10 spheres, is rooted where? Before the tzimtzum. But the kav now has in it a message that's also an ein arech message, because it's also a kav. That the tzimtzum reminds the kav, which reminds us that the infinite distance of the divine. At the same time, the kav is an element of closeness to us, because it's gili, not like the tzimtzum. And that gili is rooted in the 10 hidden spheres, which is in turn rooted in the er bligvul. So the kav has an element of atik and has an element of arich, essentially. The element of arich is its relationship with existence and the beginning of the spheres, as spheres that relate to us, independent reality. And the part of kav that is tovuk, that's connected to before, is like the er bligvul that is informed by the er bligvul. That's the atik in the kav. That reminds us of the elikuz, the Ein Sof, that's completely infinitely distant. So we actually have two ways of understanding the infinite distance of the divine. Infinite distance. According to the Keseh, we don't have infinite distance. All we have is we can only relate to the Ein Sof that relates to us. So in other words, that part of the divine that is completely beyond, according to in the Ramak's paradigm, you only believe that. You don't have a way of understanding it. There's no way to describe it or explain it. According to Arizal, you can explain it. Number one, Tzimtzum does that. Number two, Tzimtzum does it in more of a removed way. And the Kav also does it. Once you know there's a Tzimtzum, the Kav gives us a taste of Atik. Atik, as he said, is Elikus Atzmus, Tachteinu Shebemaitzel. So we have that as well. So it's basically like the tzimtzum and the kav both are doing the same thing. Once you know there's a tzimtzum.
It's like parallel, it seems.
No, one is helam, one is gili. The tzimtzum tells you that God has to conceal everything to reveal, to allow us to be independent. Then you have a kav that brings it close to us, and we can start relating to the divine. But we can also relate to the divine that is infinitely distant because the tzimtzum took place. That's what it looks like is the pshat here, the Havana of it.
The kav was rooted in the divine.
In the 10 hidden spheres. The kav is oir. The kav is oir, remember. But it's an oir that comes in a narrow flow. It's oir hagvul. Kav is made up of spheres. It's amorphous compared to the containers. The kav, he spoke many times, is a paradox. It has in it a part that is er hagvul, but it also is skaulus. It connects it all together because it's connected to the er habligvul.
So when you make your way up, are you going up through the tzimtzum or are you going up through the kav when you're going from Mount to Lamaila?
Both. You need both.
I can't.
It's very simple. I mean,
not simple to me.
It's extremely simple because you have to understand that our existence is a limited existence. You keep forgetting. You travel to a place, you forget about this world. This world denies God's existence. How's that possible? The Kav can't account for that. Only the Tzimtzum can account for that. Kav is a revelation. It's a small revelation. You could say it's a finite revelation. The bottom line is that for us to connect to the divine in the interface, there's several aspects. There's one aspect that we connect, our structure connects, because the Er HaGvul is because the finite structure of existence, the spheres of existence, ultimately are rooted in a the divine energy, the finite energy. But you have to remember, the divine finite energy from the divine perspective is just as infinite as the infinite. But it's there. The artist has now associated himself with 10 spheres. It's not a jump that the God is beyond everything, and suddenly, pop, we have 10 spheres in existence. The 10 spheres are envisioned. So there's a relationship. However, there's a big gap. Our spheres, we see them as structure. The spheres in Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum are not structure. They're part of the divine soup, so to speak. So the Tzimtzum deals with that aspect. The Tzimtzum conceals those and says, you know what? My friends, your spheres are rooted there, but they're completely infinitely distant from there, because the way that we have a table is not how God envisions a table. It's very, very different. Because God's envisioning a table is Ein Sof. And a table that we have is actually a finite structure that, number one, has real parameters. Number two, it can even be independent in that sense that it's source. Where'd that come from? Eir HaGvul, before the Tzimtzum, if you interview it, will tell you very clear, I'm God's force to create Gvul. Gvul in existence doesn't say that. Gvul in existence says, hey, I'm here, I have a whole show. Where does that come from? That type of ability to deny. So the ability of Yesh to be a Yesh that thinks it's self-created, that comes from Atzmus, fine. But what's the process? If everything comes from, how could the stone deny that something is throwing the stone? Because there's a tzimtzum that blocks the stone from seeing. And also the tzimtzum shows that the source is completely distant and infinitely distant. So now we have that aspect. The Kav then comes and helps us come to both understandings. Even when we talk about tzimtzum, we're also talking about it. It's also a gili about the helam. We're talking that there's a concealment. So the Kav does a few things. Number one, the Kav is now carrying and shaping existence based on the instructions of embedded in the code of the Eir HaGvul before the Tzimtzum. Clear?
Yeah, that's clear.
One second. But the Kav also is a narrow Kav. It has to also work and deal with. It also teaches us that it is not in its full glory as it is before the Tzimtzum. It is affected by the Tzimtzum, because the Tzimtzum allowed it to become tangible, so to speak, and ultimately will become spheres in Atzilus and all the way down here. So the Kav also has in it so-called a reminder and tells us about the Tzimtzum. The reason I'm saying it is because Kav also reminds us of the Shalei Be'erech. That's my point. I wanted to just add, because the Kav has in it also a memory that the Eir HaGvul has of the Eir HaBli Gvul. So the Kav also has that memory in it. In addition, I was just adding that the Kav, that I think that Tzimtzum is also, the Kav reveals to us that there's a Tzimtzum. It's telling us there's a Tzimtzum. Because the Kav, in a sense, is the carrier of all awareness. That's all I'm saying. That's all I added here. Because I wanted to add the Hatoka of Atik exists. What's Atik? Because he said at the bad end of the parentheses.
So it's not. It could be a Kav. It's like a revelation that comes down to the Tzimtzum. That's what it seems like. That's why I'm getting confused.
So what? So there's revelations. It's true, but it doesn't contradict the other parts of the revelation. Yeah. Okay, so let's finish the Maimer. The bottom line is we need to have both a concealment and revelation for us to have the real, full relationship. The Ramak speaks primarily about revelation, and the Arizal speaks about revelation and concealment. The concealment is what allows the infinite distance aspects to be part of our existence. No, the God did not make, there was no tzimtzum, and He just implanted Atik and said, here, there is a Tachten Shabamaitzel, the beginning of Kesher is an element of Lakus. It would be like a complete, impossible to relate to. We have to know that Reisha Delay Yada, that it's not known. We need to know that it's not known. Okay. Vapi Hanal Yuvan. So after you explained that there's the Klal and the Prat, that's an existence. Vapi Hanal Yuvan will understand Inu Meitzeim L'Maseyim. Remember in the beginning of the chapter, beginning of the Maimer rather, he said, Ele Mas B'nei Yisrael, V'yichtav Meishes Meitzeim L'Maseyim, V'Maseyim L'Meitzeim. He asked the question, what is this Meitzeim L'Maseyim? The Pashta Taich, what we cite was that Moshe writes, what's the simple Taich, Meitzeim L'Maseyim?
I think Meitzeim is like where they're coming from,
and their travel, and to their journeys. Okay. So he asked the question what all that is. So now he's going to answer it. He also asked, why does it say Vayichtav Meisha? Why that Moshe wrote down and documented the journeys? The whole Torah, Hashem said, and Moshe wrote. So now I'm going to answer. Because now Yisrael, souls of Israel, they arose in the mind, in God's mind. That means machshava. What does machshava mean? It's the primordial thought of Adam Kadmon. Pirush al machshava hainu madregel yena shebemchinas shebemachshava. Allah b'machshava means Allah. It arose. So he's touching Allah from the word Elyon, in the higher level of machshava. So Allah usually means you're sitting, and suddenly a thought falls into your head. But Allah, if you're more precise, Allah means it's an aliyah in machshava, an Elyon. It's the highest level in machshava. It's pnimiyasak. So when we say Allah b'machshava, you're saying that it's all Allah b'machshava. They're rooted in the inner dimension of ak. The kashem shebeseder stalshis shefesh ben sheresh and neshamas l'sheresh hamalachim. Just like in the cosmic order, there's a difference between the root of souls and the root of angels. The malachim shashim mechitzenius hakelim, the neshama shashim pnimis hakelim. Malachim are rooted in the outer containers. Souls are rooted in the inner containers. I believe we learned this. Kamarkain, similarly, who b'sharshim b'machshava gduma da'ak. Same thing is in their root in ak. The primordial thought, the nak, the shashim of neshamas is pnimiyasak. So in the lower level, it's pnimiyas kelim, and the higher in the root, it's pnimiyasak, the inner dimension of this thought. V'zeh moitza ehem shehu meloshenu k'moitzi mayim. The word moitza ehem is from the expression of k'moitzi mayim. What means moitzi mayim? Moitzi mayim is like the source of water. K'moitzi mayim. Like the thing that from where water is derived. That means their root and their source. The inyan masayim, the second word, the masayim, the journey, zeu aliyas hanashamas. That's the elevation of the souls. V'hu hanashamas k'mashen lamati yal l'shashim b'bchinas primiyasak. So mitzayim, the masayim means.
Go back to your source.
Yeah, Mitzayim is the source. Mitzayim is the journey. What's the journey? That the souls, as they are below. So that's Mitzayim. They said that Moshe wrote Mitzayim the Mitzayim. He wrote that the journey of the souls that are below should travel back Mitzayim, li Mitzayim, so to speak, to their root and source in Primiyasak, which is Olu b'machshav. I don't know if he's trying to say Yisrael Olu b'machshava, that Yisrael should elevate in machshava, but I don't think so. He teaches Olu from the Dereg Elyon, because now you can say Olu from the word Aliyah, but Olu is not correct. It's not neshamas go up into machshava; it's neshamas arose in machshava. It's just interesting. How could souls down a lower and go up? So first you need a transmission that draws down from the root and the source. Through this will be the elevation. So in other words, it's a power that comes from below, above. An example similar to the elevation that happens at Shabbos. Shabbos, we know, Malchus elevates, as it's known. But for Shabbos, for the Malchus, to elevate, you first need to have a transmission from above. That's the inyan when we say l'chadedi likras kala. What does l'chadedi likras kala mean? Go, my beloved.
Hashem.
Yeah.
So give us the
L'kreis kala, to greet. L'kreis to
Likras. Okay.
How do you say in Kegel? Toward. L'chadedi. In other words, go, my beloved, to greet the queen, to greet the bride. So l'chadedi is the amshacha, l'kreis kala to the recipient. In other words, to the neshama. Dahainu amshacha b'chinas zah. Zah is deidi. That means the transmission of zah, zeh rampin midis. L'yisai dezeh aliyas hamalchus. What is the point? So the groom, the beloved groom, walks over to the greets, approaches the kala malchus. So that's the amshachim amayla. So that malchus should be able to, in order to cause it to go up. Or kamoy came baliyas and neshama tzarich li'tchila amshachas amayla.
Kala goes up.
Same thing is that when the elevation of the souls. So first you need to have the transmission from above. Rizeu meitzeim l'maiseyim. And this is meitzeim l'maiseyim. This is the meaning meitzeim l'maiseyim, that shuam shosha, the meitzeim, as we said, is from the meitzemayim, it's from the source. Shuhu amshocha mishashim mekedim. That's the transmission from the root and the source. Liyas aliyah, for there to be the elevation. Vayidezeh maiseyim l'meitzeim. Then we have the second expression, and through this is meitzeim l'meitzeim. Shemisalim l'shashim. So those are the two expressions in the pasuk. Eila masim b'nei Yisrael sheyotzim eretz Mitzrayim v'yichtav Moshe es mitzeim l'maseim ve'eila maseim l'mitzeim. So Moshe wrote mitzeim l'maseim. He wrote first the amshach, in other words, that mitzeim, the root, the source. Right. And second, that it should go travel downward, in order for there to be
travel
upward, which is Meitzeim the Meitzeim. Meitzeim the Meitzeim. That the travel should be. So it's So it goes both ways, from the source to the travel, to the journey. Looks like the journey downward, or to the journey that will be upward, and then the journey actually that goes back to the source. Mashakos Yichtav Moshe. So what does it mean now? Yichtav Moshe. That Moshe wrote this. Didn't we learn that everything comes from Hashem? Hashem said it, and Moshe wrote it. God said. Ha'inyan dihine b'teira yesh gam ken klal prat. K'Moshe is bar. The Indian is in this is because in Teira there's also a general principle, a klal, all encompassing, a prat and a detail, and the detail. Well, K'Moshe is bar, as we shall explain. And souls are rooted in Teira, as it's known. And therefore, their elevation is also through Teira. So, in other words, why is the Teira document this whole journey? Because for the souls to travel, it needs to go through Teira. Remember, we said that Ak is Klal and Prat. Ak is the source of the whole process. So you need to have. Remember, I mentioned before that the worlds are not physical worlds. They're constantly the process of existence, of the surge of energy, all the way from Erein Yisrael before the Tzimtzum, all the way to here is happening all the time. What we have is basically stages. Where are you accessing? So the pipe is always working. It's always going. In the physical world, once you plant a seed in the ground, it grows into a tree. The tree is no longer a seed. In the spiritual world, you have everything there all the time. Here, you have the seed. You have the seeds blossoming. You have the tree. You have the big tree. So Ak is essentially the seed of it all. So Pnimius Ak is where the neshamas are rooted, right? Because that's where it all begins. They're rooted in the Ma'olam Achshava, in the beginning of the seed that was planted. So then they travel downward, and they become a full tree in existence, so to speak. But then the Teira, which is Ak, documents this, because the Teira also has Klal and Prat, and the souls are rooted there. So first it comes down. First it's the Mitzayim, the Masayim, and then Mitzayim, the Mitzayim. So you have both expressions. You have from the seed going to the full-blown entity, and the souls then give them the power for them to go up and reconnect to it. So it's right to the source, even as they are down below. So that's the picture. So that's Torah. So why do you need Moshe? Why don't you just say the Eibishter? Remember, he said Istakal Baraiso Bara Kudsha B'Richas Istakal Baraiso. The Eibishter looks in Torah and creates the world. So you could say, why do you have to have the Moshe? What's Moshe's role here? So he says that's how Torah is already in a state of detail. The Ozi B'Chinas Esis Aksav. That's Vayichtiv. That's when it comes in written letters. The Torah Kameshi B'Chinas Klal. The Torah as it is in a state of a Klal. In other words, like we said before, Breishis Nami Maimerhu. The Torah is a klal that encompasses everything. There it's in a state of engraved letters. Like the letters in the tablets. Like it says elsewhere. However, the Torah is in a detail has a b'chinas esis aksav. That's already letters, written letters. And through this is the aliyah. In other words, if it didn't say Vayichtav Moshe, it was just God giving us through Torah, you would not really be able to reach the souls as they are in the detailed level down below. In other words, he's speaking now another level within Ak itself. So Ak is a klal. But because there's also the prat of it, Vayichtav Moshe, so Moshe is already discussing the details that we can relate to, and that's what gives the souls the power to elevate.
Actually, so it's between the first and the second giving of the Torah, first time the gift of the Seres Dibros, and the second time Moshe did so, there must be some sort of advantage in the second.
That's true. He's not saying it here because both of them are luchas there. Even the second is still Moshe, not the Sefer Torah. When you say Vayichtav Moshe, you're not talking about the luchas. That would be Vayachkak Moshe. That was still engraved. Now, in the engraving, there's two levels. But here he's going a level further. When Moshe, why did Moshe have to write a Sefer Torah? Why do we need a written Sefer Torah? Why don't we have tablets? So besides the fact that tablets is only the 10 Commandments, but the tablets is also a klal. They encompass all the Taryag mitzvahs. That's why it's Tarach. There's 620 letters in the tablets, in the 10 Commandments. But then you need the prat. You need Vayichtav Moshe. They should write the Sefer Torah every detail. So basically, Moshe is an interface between the engraved letters of the klal of Torah to the neshamas, and that allows. It's like another interface within the interface. So
parallel to Ak too.
Yeah, Ak is only the klal. However, Vayichtav Moshe, Moshe writing it. Yeah, that's the whole point. Ak is a klal.
Just learned as an interface between
as klal and prat.
Klal and prat. So
it is the klal.
It's both.
No, it said Ak is the klal. That's the interface to the prat. Ak is the klal that precedes the prat, basically.
Is a world because Torah is a dibrat.
Ak is a spiritual, divine world. Just remember that. We're not talking here a planet.
But how can Ak be the klal and still be the interface between klal and prat?
Because you can't get to a prat without a klal. So if you skipped Ak, you.
No, I'm saying you're doing both. It's both.
It's not. No. The pratim will come out of Ak. Ak is the seed. It says it clearly. It says like this. He says these are the words. Just looking at exact words. We're going to learn it more in detail. It doesn't spell it out yet, but that's how it appears. So the point that he's saying now is that the Torah is a klal, and the Torah also has prat. The Yichtav Moshe is the prat, the details. V'adezehu aliyah. The Aliyah is that Torah gam kameshi is galus. Because being that the Torah, even also the way it's in the revealed state, the b'chinas prat, in details, how do you madrega atzmis? Because the Torah, even as it is in its revealed state, even in the details, it's still a madrega atzmis. It's still a core essential level. Al kenat Torah, and that's why through the Torah, yachli is aliyah l'shashim. Okay, through the Torah there can be an elevation to the root and the source, b'chinas primis ak, in the inner dimensions of ak. V'zeu elab ma'aseh b'nei Yisrael, and this is the meaning of these other journeys of the children of Israel. The kolosi in hamasois. Why do we talk about it even? Because the general idea of these journeys, hu aliyah the neshamas l'shashim mekera. So technically, these are the journeys of the children of Israel as they left Egypt, going to the Promised Land. But in Aved and Ruchnis, this is the aliyah, the elevation of the souls as they climb to their root and their source. They're going from Mitzrayim to Eretz Yisrael. So they're going through a journey, and they're elevating. They're elevating to their root and their source. So it's talking about this elevation as we are down below and how we go back to the source. B'chdei shetia aliyah. In order for this to be this elevation, first need to have the hamshach. That's Meitzayim l'masayim, from the source to the journey. And that through that causes from below, from the journey back to the source. Moshe writes this. Why? Because the aliyah is through Torah. You can't climb on your own. You need Torah. And that's through the writing of Torah, that the Torah that comes in detail. Because how could a soul down below suddenly jump back up there? You can't just jump to the klal, but by writing specific instructions. Moshe writes here, this journey, one journey, second journey, third journey, and the details of the Torah, and all the details of Torah mitzvahs. This is the elevation of the souls of Israel, the shashim to their root and their source, the primordial thought of Adam Kadmon.
There's 42 journeys. There's 42 matzalah milas and.
6 times 7.
It's matzalah.
Both.
Both. And we're talking about spirits. These are 49. So what's the?
There's a whole mimer. Look at the Torah, Parasha Masay. He speaks that the Masay only cover till Yesod. So 6 times 7, as opposed to 7 times 7. The Malchus is included. He speaks about the difference in the 42 journeys and the 49, which is another 7. The Midas is more bitter. Remember, the Sfiras Eimer is more of a refinement, so you have to go through everything. The Masayis, Malchus is covered once you do the first 6. Explains it in the Likutei Torah. So let me just explain something here. You learn in Tanya, it goes like this. We have an existence. We live in a world. God created the universe for a purpose. The world is a complicated world, as we learned. And this, especially in this lowest of worlds, the divine is concealed. As in Tanya Perek Lamed Vav, it's all concealed. Tachtenim. What's Tachtenim means? It says lowest in the form of revelation. That all the divine energy is concealed in this world, which is why we don't feel it. And we can even deny it. So in Perek Lamed Vav, he explains all the levels. But then there's a purpose in all this. The purpose is fulfilled through us recognizing this, changing the course, and revealing the divine in existence. And through Torah mitzvahs is the tool that we have to do so. Torah teaches us, Torah is like air that comes into existence, that helps us understand and gives us the instructions through the mitzvahs, what actions and what the exact things we should do to reclimb the ladder and climb back up to the source. Take away Torah, the purpose is there, we're here, but we have no instruction manual. And more importantly, we don't have the koyach to do it. Like he says in Tanya as well, in that same Perek, that Torah gives ein eiz ela Torah, Hashem eiz l'amiyit, and God gives strength to us. Because for us to live in a finite world with containers and limitations, And to experience the divine, we need something to hold on to. So Torah becomes that interface. Because Torah is divine, the divine message, the divine will and the divine wisdom. But it's in a language that we can relate to. It says, do this, do that, do that, do that. So the Torah travels, as he says in the beginning, through all these worlds. From this highest source, it's like it brings us a message. Nasa v'yarda, right? The Torah is Nasa v'yarda. It travels. The Torah itself is, by the way, Maseh, is a travel. It travels through, so there's a Torah in Ak, there's a Torah in Atzilus, there's a Torah in Bria. We actually learned it, how Torah has all these different levels. Now, so in each world that we're in, you have the Torah of that world. So the Torah is Chochmah. So in the beginning he began to discuss it's Chochmah of Atzilus. Now Atzilus, you keep asking me about the difference in Torah. I don't really understand your question. There's the world and there's the Torah in the world. What's the problem? Chochmah of Atzilus is God's Chochmah. Torah manifests God's Chochmah. At the same time, there's also a structure of spheres that will ultimately create a structure in existence where there's a separation. The world is meant to be aligned with the Torah. In a perfect world, the world and Torah would be aligned. But not in an imperfect world, we have to align the existence to the Torah in this world. But the Torah exists in all the levels. And the level that the Torah that he's speaking now is Chochmah of Ak. That's where he began speaking in chapter 164. So Chochmah of Ak, as he just said now, is what? Chochmah of Ak. Ak is the klal. And there's also the prat. So Torah is vayichtav. That's the engraved letters. The written letters is the details. And that gives us the power to climb through all these levels, through all these stages. So what we established in this Maimer, the last few Maimarim, is that we have Atzilus is a Mamutza. Then in Kuf Samach Beis he starts, you need to do a Torah, Gamken Bechilis Mamutza. Stalka Baraisa Bara Alma. He has not explained the difference between the interface between Atzilus and Ak and Torah. Because remember, we spoke about Atzilus is what gives us awareness, Yediyah and Hergish Nalakus. Without Atzilus, we can't have an understanding and a feeling in the divine. So what does that mean? Is that independent of Torah or with Torah? So you could actually understand it both ways. Remember, we talked the others didn't have Torah, technically. So, and nevertheless, they had the ability to have some awareness. Torah obviously manifested in a full glory, in the full sense of the word. So the bottom line is that meanwhile, but these are the words that he said. That we have Atzilus as Mamutza, we have Torah as Mamutza, now we have Ak as the Mamutza interface, and Torah is now the Chochmah of Ak. That's what we've learned. What's the time now?
It's 10:08. Yeah. The kids are reading this.
Okay, we'll do the Titzah now. Omnam Chochmah de Torah Chochmah de Ak. This is a summary of the whole chapter. Omnam, however, the Chochmah, the wisdom of Torah, is the wisdom of Ak. Moshel HaKadmeni. And remember, the wisdom of Ak means the wisdom of God, as He is implanted in Ak. Whose wisdom? There's no other wisdom there. There's no wisdom of the world. There's no wisdom of human beings. There's wisdom of godliness. Chochmah of Ak, Chochmah of Atzilus is all divine wisdom. The question is what level it is. It originates, remember, God is Iyu Chakim v'le b'chochmah yediyah. He's wise, but not in any knowable, discernible, or conscious type of wisdom. But there's Chochmah, because remember we spoke Eira Gvul. There is the power of Chochmah, wisdom, divine. You say you can't say God is wise. You can't say He's not wise. So you say He's not nice, but He has. There's a Chochmah. That Chochmah will be the origination of our intelligence. Human intelligence on earth is rooted in the Chochmah of Asiyah, which is rooted in the Chochmah of Yitzira, and Bria, and Atzilus, and all the way to Chochmah of Ak. So this is divine wisdom. Torah, when you talk about Torah as wisdom, the wisdom of Torah, what he's saying is Torah is the level of Chochmah of Ak, not Chochmah of Atzilus. Chochmah of Atzilus, you could say, okay, so Torah's wisdom is not rooted all the way in the seed, so to speak. But obviously it is. Torah is rooted even higher. But as Chachma, the Chachma of Torah is related to Chachma of Ak. In other words, through Torah you can get to the understanding the beginning of the process, not just the Atzilus part of it. Atzilus is aligned. Everything is aligned. But saying that as Chachma of Ak is saying that the Torah is rooted all the way in this source code. Moshel HaKadmeni, like he said, there's the primordial metaphor. In the beginning he said, primordial metaphor. What's the word? Moshel HaKadmeni. What are those words? Yeah. In chapter 164, it's a mashal. Yeah. Ak levush le'ensof. Ak is a garment for the ensof. Dine ak b'chinas mamutza. Because ak is a state of interface. But here comes the question: V'aloyhu adam debriya. But then, isn't it adam debriya, the man of briya, creation? So how could it be a mamutza interface to Ein Sof? Ha'inyan hu tisavas el mishadiyat tzimtzum. The savas elements, the creation of the world is through the tzimtzum. V'zeu shegila ha'arizal. This is what the Arizal revealed. The Mekubala Makedmim, the previous Kabbalists, Mechashvu, they thought Hakol b'chinas olav. What did I say? Olav. I said olav. Yeah. They saw everything in a state of ilav, cause and effect, which is a commensurate. Ishtavus, some type of commonality, similarity. And that's where the Ramak, after he distances Keser in proportion to Ein Sof, so even though he distances it, but still writes that the Etzem HaKeser, core Keser, is a state that is similar, has a commonality of the Maitzil. Keser is a state that creates a commonality. Mishtave, ha'maitzel v'ha'netzel. The source, the emanator, and the emanation.
So he sees it as an interface also.
Yeah. However, it's a different type of interface, because it has commonality. But in truth, it's not appropriate to create, it's not possible any type of commonality. And that means that's through the tzimtzum that we could understand that, which Ramak did not have. So the Ramak understood that you have to distance Keser from Ein Sof, but there's also a commonality. So he's not addressing this infinite distance. That, in other words, this thing that there's no commonality at all. That the tzimtzum addresses. That's the chiddush of the tzimtzum.
So the commonality is based on a lower level of Ein Sof, so to speak.
That's the explanation of this. He doesn't say this specifically. In other words, because you have to have the problem. What does the Ramak do? What does he think that Ramak is a holy Kabbalah? Did he think that the core of Elokus has something common to us? So you have to say he's talking about Ein Sof that core of Elokus we don't deal with. I mean, on the simplest level, basically the Ramak is simply addressing the relationship, everything in the context of, but Seichel of the Ramak is Ilavol, cause and effect. Or Be'in HaKeser, and then he goes to the parentheses. And in the Keser, Ramak Shevishu Mitzias Mishave, and Keser itself, the Ramak holds that it's it's something that was created. According to Arizal Atik, the higher level of Keser is Ein Sof B'Hatoka. Ein Sof, so-called removed, copied of Ein Sof. Which is consistent with his difference. So therefore, what is the interface of Ak? Ak is on this side of the fence. It's in the side of the fence that it's already in existence. The Inyan is the Savas B'Pelu Ad Agilui. is because the creation in actuality comes through revelation. That's why first you need the creation. He says here specifically. That's ak in a general state, like a seed.
Allows us what?
What?
Not to get too...
Yeah, go back to the words in the last chapter. He says like this. Yeah, so he says like this. If a tree suddenly popped out of earth, it would be, number one, would be a illogical thing. Number two, would be no way to trace the steps. So the way God created the logic of the world is things grow. Like, you don't become an adult. First there's a conception of a seed. So first of all, it's just a process that allows for existence to emerge properly. So we find from this that Ak's role is not compared to Ein Sof. With the Ein Sof, that's completely separate from the worlds. We just said Ak is also infinitely distant from. Kim legabe hagili. Ak's role is compared to Gili. Once you're already applying yourself to reveal and to create that which is through revelation, that's where Ak kicks in and becomes the interface between Klal and Prat. So like I said, the Tzimtzum creates the leap. Think of it this way. Here's the infinite soup. That everything is beyond all of existence. Okay? How do we get now? How do we jump the hurdle? So Tzimtzum explains that. There's a radical jump. God conceals it all. Elokuz b'pshitus is no longer, divine consciousness is no longer the dominating consciousness. There's not room for another consciousness. Ak, in this context, is not an interface at all. The Tzimtzum is dealing with that. Ak is just another part. But now, after the smoke clears of the Tzimtzum, think of the Tzimtzum like a big crater has been created. You know? Now the smoke clears. Now what? Now comes Gili. The Kav enters and starts shaping. So now Ak kicks in. Its role is to begin to the beginning of the process, Klal. So in the Gilui, Ak starts serving as an interface. In the Helam, in the concealment, which is really the jump, the radical jump, there Ak is also infinitely distant. The Ramak doesn't talk about the crater. He doesn't talk about what was before the crater. He talks about existence. He starts when the smoke is cleared already. So he speaks about a Keser that is very distant from Ein Sof, but that has already a commonality. Basically, the Ramak, as I said, does not address any radical jumps. He doesn't address paradigm shifts. He addresses the paradigm that we already have.
No supernal crowns.
Right. And therefore, also by his Atik, he doesn't have Atik. What he has is Keser. And Keser, what?
How do you translate paradigm?
Paradigm shift?
Qualitative shift.
Paradigm is a iskuk. Yeah. Perspective. But it's more than a perspective. It's a whole perspective. It's a whole understanding of a system. It's a consciousness. Like, for example, when Einstein introduced new theories, he changed the paradigm. He didn't come and change a little detail. He changed the whole way of looking at it. Yeah, but it's also paradigm is a structured perspective and a structure. When you say paradigm shift, means a real shift, not in a detail, but in the whole picture changes. So here we said Elokuz b'pshitus, Elam is b'schachus. Elam is b'pshitus. Elokuz b'schachus is a paradigm shift, the ultimate paradigm shift. In other words, you think I exist, and then God enters, or does God exist and then I enter? That's a paradigm shift.
Perspective.
God does it through Tzimtzum one way, and our role is to change it back, which is far more difficult, because you're contending with God's Tzimtzum here now. You're fighting all the time with God's concealment. What I keep trying to explain is how the parentheses of Atik fits into all of this. Why would he bring that here? But he brought it. No, I know why he brought it. He brought it because it's a question. Because initially you'd think that Arizal also says it's similar. He explains, no, Atik by the Arizal is not similar. It's a copy of Ein Sof here. So you have to say that means that Ein Sof decided to plant itself. From the Ramak, he gives value to existence because existence has some commonality. For the Arizal, there's no value to existence. There's total bittul. But God wants that part. I'm saying, Yesh Leimer, that because of Tzimtzum, that's why the Arizal can afford to give us a piece of Atik rather. If you don't have the Tzimtzum, then there's commonality, then you can't relate to, there's no Atik by you.
Get there.
Yeah. If you're not ready to accept that God is completely infinitely distant, you're not going to be able to have a piece of Him. You'll have it on your terms.
A level.
On your terms, right. Upon according to the Ramak, you don't have no relationship, you can't see it. According to the Arizal, upon if you don't look, you're going to see it. It's a deeper level of bittul. Don't get wrong, the Ramak would also have a bittul. But the Ramak's bittul is ultimately, you get more annihilated. The Ramak also says, look, he asked the Ramak a question, he was sitting, he'd say, you know what he'd say? He'd say, Atzmus beyond everything. But what the Ramak would have is to get to that Atzmus, you have to eliminate all of you.
Yeah.
And the Arizal, you could remain you and have that because you have total bittul, and you recognize that he's completely infinitely distant.
Right.
Like I said with the Rebbe, you stand in front of the Rebbe. So one person only appreciates the Rebbe as a wise man. So he's wiser than me, but we have some. We can still have coffee together, right? Then you have someone who recognizes, oh, it's completely infinitely distant. I can't even talk to him. Can't relate to him. And then you have that if you're aware of that infinite distance, then you could begin to have a conversation with him and talk to him, first of all, on your level. And also, you can begin to have a taste of his completely state of beyond. Because you know there's a tzimtzum here. So there's two options.
And you know it through the car.
So there's two options. There's an option that you just don't know it, and that's that. And if you want to know that Shlei Berech, you have to completely disappear. Or there's the option where you are aware that there's something completely. It's like this. There are people there are people who don't know that they don't know. There are people who know that they don't know. Understand the difference? So the tzimtzum is that you know that you don't know.
You know that you don't know.
Yeah. With Ramak, it would be you know what you know, but what you don't know, you don't even know that you don't. Yeah, you don't know that you don't know. Or you could say there's no knowing there. That's completely outside of my realm. Yeah. So once you say I know that I don't know, already gives you a bittul that allows you in to that inner sanctum.
Yeah.
But this is my explanation. I'm sure they can be explained differently. The Rebbe Rashab doesn't say what I said now. So Atik, the interesting thing with Atik, everything twists over. Because Atik gives us a copy of Ein Sof, but it's not Hishtavus. It's not that we're similar, but we still, it's like in other words, if you're bittul enough, God will reveal Himself to you in the fullest way. If you still think you have something in common, you basically block out seeing the reality that He is. You'll only get a piece of Him, the part that relates to you. That's essentially, it sounds to me, is the key chord to this whole thing. Yeah, I think we should stop here because I'm going to start the Maimed, then starts a new union. Okay, so we finished Discourse 41. We did the end of the Maimed, page 330 and 331.